And then next up, he was actually our star NLP presenter at the very first Chatbot conference in San Francisco back in 2017, which now feels like a lifetime ago.
It does, yeah.
With where it is. So I'm sure most people know you, and they probably already have like a list of questions for you, but let's pretend the few that don't, you can tell them a little about yourself, a little bit about Rasa, and your thoughts about where we are in terms of the space. And then we'll just open it up. I know Yaki's going to have a lot of questions for you. Dustin is already thinking questions, and so is Jason. So.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Exciting to try out this format as well here, fully online. Yeah. My name is Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Rasa, and I mean the conference that Stefan just described in 2017. It indeed feels like ages ago. I think back in the days was I think one of the first year where chatbots were cool again. I mean, as we all know, they've been cool in different waves before. I think back to the 60s. But that was like pretty much the year right after F8, the big conference back in the days from Facebook announcing their API. And so when I was in SF, there was like the high peak time, I would say, in many ways. And back in the days, and the reason why I also gave a talk about NLP and what else is kind of missing for like the developer ecosystem. Alan, my co-founder, and I, we were pretty much just like working on chatbots ourselves in like late 2016. So just before everything started. And then just realized that it's really hard to build great AI assistants, how we call them now. We're not the biggest fans of chatbot as a name anymore. And pretty much, I think, realized that back in the days that the tooling for developers is just, not as great as it could be. There's been a big gap that we found between like the latest and greatest research that you find on Archive and like all the machine learning publications, and then what actually ends up being a developer tool. And so we just started like working on our own tooling, open source some of that, and that then eventually led to Rasa. And fast forward to today, our mission is to become what we call like the standard infrastructure layer for conversational AI. So pretty much providing open source tooling to developers all over the world to build better assistants. And with that, have invested a lot in like research and engineering over the last like 24 months to make it easier to build great AI assistants. And I think the short version on this is also, it's not super easy, right? And I think that's also why we are here. We're discussing like challenges and things that, might not still be as easy as they could be and should be. And that's also our general view on conversational AI, that it's still very early. And that's why I love events like that, where the industry comes together and shares like best practices and talks about also the things that don't work yet, right? And I think that's really, really very, very much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you are able to communicate really complex topics and you make them simple and accessible, which is very hard to do. And you have this model of the 5 stages of NLP, NLU understanding. And can you talk a little bit about what those 5 stages and where we are currently, and what does that mean for the majority of bots? And and then you can give like a little preview of like, are we at like step, for example, 2 or 2.5 or 3 or 3.5? Like, where are we really?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, overall, the reason why we came up with this is not so much that we felt like the world needs another framework, but mostly because we realized that a lot of people in the Rasa open source community were either like super excited about chatbots and just thought that they are like going to solve all their problems. And then the people that actually tried building them or tried chatbots that other people build realized that they're actually not as great, right? And so you had this kind of like these two sides, and we felt like for us, from our experience as my co-founder and I, 2 developers, we realized that there's really a continuum, and so we came up with these like 5 levels of AI assistance, how we call it. And so level 1 is pretty much for us like really just like a notification, and it's something that we've all been used to for a very long time from the iPhone and Android phones. Level 2 is what we call an FAQ assistant, and that's really 1 question and 1 answer. Level 3, or like it could be a having a bit of dialogue, right? But mostly it's like rule-based, hard-coded dialogue. Level 3 is what we call a contextual assistant, and that pretty much allows you for like more back and forth, sometimes also like questions out of context and like brings you into a different part of the conversation. Level 4 is for us a personalized assistant, and it's of course personalization beyond just calling somebody out by the name or something obvious like that. And then level 5 is really like a combination of all these assistants combined together and like bring in what we call like an autonomous organization. And I mean, in terms of like timing, right? I think a lot of people right now are between level 2 and level 3 or something like that, I would say roughly. Most people like 3 years ago or so started with like level 2. So like Wit.ai or like also back in the days Dialogflow when it wasn't called Dialogflow allowed you pretty much to do like NLU, like FAQs and like one question, one answer pairs. And then you had to hard code your dialogue. Now there's a bit of more context built into it. And what we as a company at Rasa work on is like allowing more developers to build level 3 assistants that can actually learn from real conversations. And so that's roughly like how we look at the market. Like I think a good example of like level 3 is like Duplex, for example, that was like launched a year ago from Google. I think that's a cool example of like how level 3 could look like. And that's really also, I think, what the industry goes towards to. And also realizes that it's, as I said, like I think not as easy as most people think in the beginning.
Yeah, I remember when we first got started, we focused on that 2017, those really smart notifications with, so like level 1 and level 2 bots. Yeah. So one of the concepts that you've talked about is developing bots without intents at some point. What would that even look like, and what does that mean? And I know Yaki is thinking about it. He has questions, and so does Dustin.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think anyone who ever built an assistant realizes that at some point in time you get too much into like details of like how you cut intents and like what should be an intent. And so like one of my favorite examples is always if you think about a like form that you fill out, right? So if you go through a flow of like signing up for an insurance policy or so, and then there's a question about like what's your gender or like what's your date of birth and things like that, right? And I mean, other than some of those things, I think also should be done if you can through a UI, right? I mean, I think a date picker is sometimes better than just like spelling out in natural language like the date, which is like a super complicated task to do for a computer, I think so until today, and for many other reasons, which I won't get too much into. But so let's say you use a natural language interface for that specific date, right? In this case, the intent is really to just answer the question and to provide something that you were asked for already. So it doesn't really make much sense to call it like an input intent or like how most people do it right now, because you have to put it into something in order to get an NLU system to detect it. And I mean, it's just one example of that, right? But I think in general, the big promise of this is also really to have like end-to-end learning at some point in time through like a whole dialogue. And I think that's what's really interesting.
Alex, can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we're in a Q&A, of course.
I know I was always a regex person, regular expression person, right? What is the difference between an intent and a regular expression or a concatenation of ORs, of regular expressions in every single input? It's exactly the same, right?
Well, I mean, I think depends what you're doing with this regex, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you use the regex to
anything else to an intent beside the match to a certain number or one of a certain number of regular expressions.
Well, I mean, are you talking about the intent?
You really need to train for an intent. Isn't it much easier to just list 2 or 3 or 4 regexes which cover the entire intent?
Well, I mean, if like let's just assume that's true, then we would already be talking to a lot of great AI assistants, right? And we don't, because regex is something that has been possible before even deep learning arrived, right? So it's like nothing new in that sense. And I mean, people built really sophisticated AI assistants in the 90s, that felt very real. But I think the big problem is that they just don't scale beyond the use cases that they came up with, right? And I think that's one problem we see also with the regex model. And I mean, as I said, like for some things, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to have a processing pipeline.
My question is, what is the difference? My question is, what is the difference? I don't see, if you train a model and then you get an intent using 20 examples, okay, or 50 examples, or you give 3 regexes, you think there is a difference in the result? If there's no difference.
Well, I mean,
you can maintain your intents later in a more sophisticated way, with reuse, without reuse, forget that. I'm saying, why go through the hassle of providing training, examples, if you can just cover it very easily with a couple of regexes that everybody can put together? You don't need to be a programmer to write a regular expression. All you need to do is to write a little star, that's all.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think that's true, then maybe you guys should go and like save the world and make them all build better assistants. I mean, I think overall, from our experience from developers, it's just the big difference between, for example, a regex and a rule-based system and an ML-based system using an intent classifier with a deep learning model, for example, is that you can actually generalize to new examples that you haven't seen before, right? And I think that's something where you really want to make sure the system is able to handle responses from the user that haven't been seen before. And that's just, I mean, from our experience, not possible with a regex.
But the intent can come deep in the conversation. The intent can surface. You can look for the intent in the first 6th or 7th turn into the conversation. The context is very, very specific. There's no way to train a system for an intent which hides inside the 7th turn of a flowing conversation, of a conversation flow. Because once you get there, in order to make training data, you need to do the entire conversation, get to the 7th turn, and then train the system, because it's a deep intent. It's not a root level intent. It's an intent which happens in the middle, inside the conversation. This is conversational AI. We're not talking about one-liners here, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. But I mean, exactly because it's conversational AI, and I think a lot of developers would agree with that. People just change their mind as well, right? And so if you would do this, like, for example, regex as part of a form filling exercise, you would not be able to like switch again, right? Because you couldn't detect that intent then that somebody wants to switch into something else, right? So maybe let's say, let's take this example of an insurance policy, and I fill out that form initially, and I say, well, I want, or like, I don't know, my birth date is like, I don't know, October 3rd, right? And it was a typo or something like that, and I want to go back to that. So that's not possible if you have a regex system, right? So
Alex, you would say that
we can take that offline. We can take that offline, but of course you can. I mean, there's no difference in the ability to go back. No difference. Look, if you have time one day in the future, we can discuss it. But I thought I found a friend in an anti-intent policy. I think intents don't cover it. Intents are good for digital assistants when you are at the root level and there is no context. Once you're inside the context, the intents become context specific, and then again context specific. And once you go to the 3rd or 4th level, it's important to handle it anymore because the intents are specific to the particular context. So maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree because Stefan told me that you have something against intents. So when you mentioned the word, I jumped. That's all.
You actually got excited.
Well, I think it's a great example also where like it makes a lot of sense to have conferences like that, right? I think a lot of like vocabulary that is used in conversational AI is either like very old school and like has been used in the past for like totally different things, or is just not applicable in a contextual assistant world, right? I think in general, if you look at level 2, which, as I said, we define as like FAQ-based assistance, you actually don't need much more than like the intent and entities, right? That's all there is. And if you look at Wit.ai, that's all they provide. If you go beyond that and have actual dialogue, there's so many other things that are important. We, as a more like experimental like exercise at Rasa, we pretty much clustered them into a bunch of different patterns. And I know you guys are also working on that. And I think that's really useful for the industry, right? Because again, it's not a cookie cutter. But I think in that context overall, I think intents won't go away forever, right? It's just for certain things they might not be needed, especially if you want to train an end-to-end system. And that's the main point of this.
So Alex, what do you think is the biggest challenge in creating a level 3 bot right now? So because I think obviously like most organizations, especially if they're like looking at a customer service use case, say Bank of America or any top institution, they have the resources, but where's the biggest difficulty in terms of creating a level 3 bot?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think in general, what we see mostly is that it's about like how you set up the team and like what roles people have in that team. And so I think that's a big challenge. And I think it's especially a challenge if you go from POC into production. So if you before that we're like more building prototypes, I think that problem doesn't really exist. And then the second one is I think more on a mindset level. I think a lot of big companies still work under the idea that they ship something once and then they make maybe like little improvements over time or like maintain software over time. I think what we've seen is that you have to constantly, as you all know, train and improve the assistant. And I think that's a like mindset that has to really shift, which is kind of in line with also like how the team is set up.
Yeah. So when it comes to team setup, I think like a lot of other projects that are not bots, they have the engineering lead. Well, who would you put in? I don't want to say in charge, but who would you put like in front, or who would you have lead first in terms of like the different roles within a team, and then and then what roles would you look to hire? Let's say you're Bank of America or and you want to create a customer service bot. How would you go about team building, and then who would you put in charge? Because like if you have, let's say, the AI people in charge, you're going to produce many different types of insights versus if you had a conversational designer in charge or a user experience designer. So what are your thoughts on that? And then what would help them get to that level 3 quicker?
I think in general, it's very similar to how you would build a website or a mobile app or like a proper web product, maybe not just like a website of a mom and pop shop or so. And I think the same way there, a lot of companies, I think just start with like, 10 years ago, people probably built mobile apps to just have mobile apps, right? And I think we are past that point in chatbots where people are definitely more on like actually validating a use case first. If before they build it, right? I think 3 years ago, people just built chatbots for the sake of chatbots. And so I think in any case, I mean, the same way as you would build a normal digital product. And so I think it usually starts with a good design process. So you want to pretty much learn like what people want to talk about, what are the key use cases, depending on like the size of the company. You can maybe look at your customer support requests or other data that you have. And then you pretty much build an assistant, then ideally you deploy it as soon as possible. And then you learn from real conversations and also analyze it over time, right? And I think in that whole spectrum, you need different people. Who I would hire first is probably the same way as you would do it for a product, like a product manager.
Okay.
And then you have like developers, maybe some NLP engineers if you need like more deep knowledge of something. But overall, that's I think like developers and NLP people, key people on the team, and then of course conversational designers as well. And so I think depending on like how sophisticated you are and want to be, they should come earlier or later in the process.
Got it. Okay. So one of the things that I enjoy most about bots, or that excites me the most, is failure. And that is that usually like when you build like an app or a website, it's like it's static content. It's like a magazine, right? You open to the table of contents, which is like your homepage. You see that, on page 42 is the FAQ. You open to page 42. Like there's very little that the user can get wrong. They can either go to page 42 or not, right?
Yeah.
But with bots, it's more like, okay, here's the magazine. You could ask me any question you want about it. right? And hopefully I can, open up to page 42 and pull that piece of information out. And so you're naturally going to have far more failure, which scares companies initially on the downside. But on the upside, your customers are telling you with their own words what they want.
Yeah.
Right. So what are some ways that companies can mitigate the downside of failure, or think about it in a really positive way and incorporate it into their product lifecycle?
I mean, I think the point here is really that it depends what you compare it to, and I think that's another addition to what I said earlier with like the mindset of learning as early as possible. Because I mean, you mentioned the website. I think a lot of people tend to think that websites, or like I guess if they compare websites to assistants, they would think that a website is I don't know, better because you can navigate it right now and you have a smaller failure rate, right? But I think what a lot of people don't look at is like what's the drop off rate from that website, right? So for example, if you have an FAQ page on your website, how many people drop off and don't get an answer to their question? And so it's just really hard to know that, right? And so with an assistant, at least because you had a really awkward conversation between the assistant and the end user, and then in the end, it makes you embarrassed, and but you can at least learn from it, right? And I think that's the point. So you want to learn as early as you can. And I think what we've seen most successful companies doing is, of course, like kind of having a smaller rollout to like a smaller group of users initially, right? To actually improve and really train the models over time as well with that new training data. And I think what even works better if you can control the recipients. So for example, we've seen a bunch of use cases that are more like outreach. So instead of like the one that you just described, Stefan, where you come to a place and then you can ask anything, it's more like with the initial message that you send, you pretty much frame the right context already, right? So like we have one example that I can talk about from an insurance company where they pretty much send SMS to like existing customers to renew their policies. And then of course, in that context of renewal, they wouldn't ask like all the questions in the world, right? And I mean, they might do, but then you can still hand it off to a human being, for example. And so I think there are lots of tricks on like the rollout process on how you can make sure that you just don't get people that ask anything.
Got it. So
I ask a question.
Sure.
When you listed the team that you would build for Rasa, you mentioned AI, you mentioned product manager. How important is I'm a conversation designer, so I come from that angle. You listed it as third or fourth. Do you think it's important that AI assistants, chatbots have a personality and it's defined very early on in the process?
So, I mean, I think conversational design, and I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but from my basic understanding, it's pretty much about like the flow, right? So how you would like actually get somebody to achieve a task, like buying a new insurance policy. And then the other piece is like the personality. And I think it's super important. So sorry if that was misleading. So like I said, or what I meant was like a product manager and then a team of like a developer, NLP person, and conversational designer. And that's also why I said like the design process is like the first step that we see. And I think in that, depending on how large you want to roll it out, you also want to define the personality early on. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that in order to define the flow at the very beginning, in order to define the use case, in order to do all those things, it's important to have a conversation designer, advise on the type of character. So that would inform the type of flow that you would build based on the personality of if the assistant
and the language, the wording.
And especially we talked about this earlier, the fallback mechanism, especially when the bot doesn't know what to say, having a personality can sometimes, we want to be transparent, especially in applications such as bank or insurance and stuff like that. You don't want to convince people that it's not a bot, but at the same time, it's always good to have some kind of clever fallback so that the user feels that it's not just this robot that they're talking to, that it's actually kind of an interaction, almost human-like interaction.
So I want to open this up to the audience real quick. So I know, Austin, you have a question. So please type it, and then we'll ask Alex directly. And then a really good question from Leanna, I hope I said that right, is what's the best way to analyze chat data to determine what modification improvements should be made to the chatbot?
Really good question. I think like what we've seen a lot still until today are really just like spreadsheets and dumps of logs, right? And I think, as you all can imagine, that breaks if you're more than one person. And so, but up until today, that's still how a lot of people are doing it. I mean, we've seen a bunch of other like just ways of like doing that. I mean, if you have dialog flow, for example, right? I mean, you have an inbox where these utterances come in, then you can label them. That usually works for NLU only. We have our own product in that space for Rasa on top of like the open source framework. We have Rasa X to learn from real conversations. I think still until today, a lot of people do the first part of like building and putting it in production, or like deploying it somewhere. Not many people do like the improving part over time, right? And I think that's something that is really dear to us, and something that we think is really, really important. Also in combination, actually, I think with a conversational designer, right? Because sometimes you might realize that you actually need like a new branch of something, for example, right? Or like you might want to redesign the flow. And I think that's also why I said earlier, like we see this more as a product, because for a mobile app, again, as well, right? You might realize that you need to, if you tweak this one button, you actually need to create like a whole other view or so, right? And I think that's also where the team question was really spot on from Stefan earlier. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, well, it does. One of the questions is also like, what's the right threshold at which point you know that change is needed, right? Because if you have too little data, then it's like it's not conclusive. It's not representative of a larger sample. But then you don't want to wait too long, because then you're not helping all those other people that you could have, updated it, let's say 2 weeks ago, and made a difference. Yeah, and then Dustin will go to you next.
Yeah. Or if you have something to add, Dustin, to that, that would be super valuable as well.
Off of that, because you made a good analogy earlier to using the same type of team that you would do for a typical web development on an actual web product. And a typical web development team would look at something like Google Analytics and get the feedback from there. Whether it's buttons, whether it's design, they're looking at the user journeys, things like that. How, with the feedback that you're getting from a chat interface and actual direct, like maybe it's a customer replying or asking for something, are you taking that feedback differently than you would with traditional analytic tools? And maybe even in some cases pivoting the company because you've got so much direct feedback. Are you seeing different trends from the feedback you're getting from chatbots compared to traditional interfaces like websites?
I mean, I think in general, and it also goes to the question from Stefan a little bit, I think the beauty of all of this is that you actually don't have to build anything to build a chatbot, right? I mean, you don't have to use any tool. You don't have to be a developer whatsoever. Alan and I, when we first started working on this, we actually really just pretended to be a chatbot ourselves. And actually, we even sold that service for $50 a month to a bunch of like people. That it was like an analytics service on top of your like Square till. And so what would happen is people would ask like, oh, how many coffees did I sell last week? And then I would ask Alan to pull that data from Square, and then he would give it to me and I would respond it, right? And so, I mean, that's one way of testing that. I think that's a big benefit for entrepreneurs because they can do it with very low cost early on without having any technical knowledge. And in fact, you can use that training data then to design and like kind of have a V1 of your assistant. I think what's harder is like once you have a certain scale of maybe like 1,000 conversations a day or something like that, you get so much input and so much data that it's almost the inverse effect from like if you use Amplitude or Mixpanel for mobile apps, right? Because there, the more data you have, the better, and you get more like signal because of that. And with assistants, you just have so much like input and so many logs that you don't know what to do with it. And that's something that, for example, like a lot of like researchers at the moment work on. Our research team is spending a lot of time on that as well. Pretty much how you can filter out the really interesting conversations. And those are usually the ones that failed or the ones that allow you to improve your model over time or so, right? And that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Alex, what's a good example of like noise versus signal in this context? Like conversations, like your book was great. Conversations that failed, for example, but maybe there's something like, in the gray area.
Good. I mean, I think the obvious example is things that you don't want the assistant to support, right? So I think the same way as like for, again, like a mobile app or website, you have certain like use cases that you just don't support. With an assistant, the problem is that you end up having people ask anything, right? And so if like 20 people ask for this one thing that you decided deliberately to not put on your roadmap to support, then this is noise in this case, right? But it's also not really noise in the sense of like, you will never use it, because if like 200 more people ask this, you probably want to support it. And so that's where it becomes tricky already, right? But I mean, other noise could also be, and I mean, you have a problem in ML over time of like overfitting a model, for example, right? So if you have too many training examples, in this case for like an intent or so, for a specific intent, that could be a problem over time. And so lots of different examples of noise.
Got it. So we have two more questions, and then we'll close it out, and then Alex tell you the best way to contact them. So one from Richard and one from Jasmine. Richard asks, how do you, or would a bit handle the delicate intricacies of cultural differences and biases against each other, against others?
Against others. Oh, I guess in the conversations across different countries and different. Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. I think overall, for us, that falls into like this level 4 personalization, right? Because I think those differences could be like on many different levels, right? I mean, if you think more like from a global level between countries, that could be a big one, of course. But even within a country, of like how people talk and would like to talk. So it's something that we haven't really spent much time on.
I see. Got it. And last question from Jasmine. Other than reviewing conversations to make your chatbot smarter, would you say that asking for feedback to your users can be beneficial or detrimental? How would you go about it?
I mean, I think it's the only thing to do if you're building AI assistants, right? And I think if you talk to like product managers of mobile apps and websites, they will also tell you that like the earlier you can get some feedback, the better. You can iterate on it. And I think for conversational AI, that question is not even there anymore, because, and again, like back to this point when Alan and I built bots, started building bots like 4 years ago or so, he would build something and then I would test it out, and I was sitting on the opposite of the table, right? And I would break it with the first thing that I said. And that's not, and I mean, Alan and I actually are pretty connected in mind, so you would assume that we might think about stuff similarly.
Right.
But I think with language, it's just getting really tricky really quickly. And so that's also why you want to give it out to as many people as possible. And your employees and like other people in the company are actually great testers early days.
Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents to it as well, Jasmine. It depends on what your goals are. So you can see, are people able to complete the tasks that, depending on what their goals are. If they're able to complete them, then you know that you have positive feedback. And then you can dive deeper and see like, okay, out of the people that completed this task using the conversational bot, where did they drop off? Where did it fail? Right? And then you can go about improving it that way. That's how I think about it anyway. So
yeah, totally. That's a really good point as well.
Yeah. Any last words? And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and learn more about NLP and Rasa?
Yeah, I mean, keep on building assistants so that we can learn as an industry together, right? And be open about sharing your lessons learned. I think that's the most important thing. Is this is all still very early, and I think nobody has like the silver bullet for all of this and to solve all the problems. I saw a question earlier about like conversational design tools as well, right? I think that's probably something that our colleagues from Coco can answer more about. But overall, I think there's a like suite of different tools that you need to ship an assistant, and like your NLP or conversational AI framework is not the only thing that you need, right? The same way as you don't only need like a database also or MongoDB to build a web application, right? You have tons of other things that are part of the stack. yeah, if you want to get in touch, just email me. I'll leave my email here in a second in the comments as well.
Perfect.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alex. And any other questions, Austin, or?
No.
No, I think.
Good.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Bye.
See you.